Darkness, a single faulty lamppost. The light flickers like a candle in wind. He stands alone with a bloodied knife in his hand. His eyes gleaming with madness and tears, he looks down on his work. She is lying still on the pavement. The lamppost blows and douses them in darkness. The moon slides out from behind a cloud and reflects in her cloudy eyes. He cries harder and cradles his girlfriend, ignoring the pouring blood from her chest. If only she hadn't chased him down. This would never have happened. As he sat there, the memories came flooding. He had woken up that morning feeling bad. He had promised he wouldn't be stealing anymore, and she said that she believed him. She saddled up right next to him in their bed and kissed him passionately. But he knew she would be crushed later that day. He was going to do it. He was going to steal that coveted diamond bracelet and send it to his friend, who dealt stolen goods on the side of his day trading job. It would mean a lot of money for him, and he could finally surprise his girlfriend with that dream vacation to Tokyo that she had wanted for so long. He felt bad for having to steal again, but did it to please his girlfriend. She was his everything and stayed with him even when he had been charged with theft on multiple occasions. Lately, she had been very strict on him not stealing and told him she would be distant if he stole again. He kissed her back and asked if he could shower before her. She immediately jumped up and got in the shower before him. He smiled a sad smile, buried his face in his pillow, and cried. Whilst his girlfriend cooked them breakfast, he stood in the shower, trying to wash off that bad feeling. He was going to do it to please her. He could just cook up a story of him winning the lottery or something, or that he had secretly been saving up his money for the surprise. No, he couldn't do that. She had caught him lying before, and always convinced him to turn himself in for the thefts that he had committed. She was on the side of justice, but also loved him so unconditionally. How could he do this to her? Then again, he was doing this to surprise her. He turned off the water and toweled off. He didn't say anything during breakfast and kissed her goodbye before she left for work. He locked the door to their flat and quickly walked down to the bus stop. He was meeting his friend down at the docks to receive instructions. Luckily, it was a grey, rainy day with lots of mist around the docks. He was the only one to get off the bus by the docks and saw that the bus driver looked at him suspiciously. He told her he liked the salty smell of the seawater and that he was going to the bar at the far end of the docks. She immediately seemed to believe him and drove off. His friend approached him from out of the mist and they went over to a secluded spot behind some containers. There was a tiny shed there which they used to play in when they were children. Nowadays it was practically falling apart, but still a good hideout for his friend's shady stolen goods operation. His friend told him where the weakest points of the security system guarding the bracelet were, and showed him how it would be easy to set up a diversion in order to get the bracelet. Later that day, he went to the museum and set off the diversion by throwing several smoke bombs into the different rooms, before stealing the bracelet. He made it out of the museum and gave it to his friend. His friend congratulated him with a successful theft, and took him to the bar on the docks to celebrate. However, the police came into the bar looking for a culprit, forcing them to run. He made it back to his flat and collapsed on the floor. His girlfriend, however, was home. He panicked and ran straight back out of the door. She tried to stop him, but he was too fast. He ran to the docks and hid in the shed. However, something felt wrong. His stomach was churning and his head was spinning. Quickly, he pulled out his mobile and called his friend. He asked what the hell was in the drink he drank. His friend suddenly sounded ice cold and unfriendly. He told him that he had mentioned his girlfriend, and that she was going to make him turn himself in again. He was an idiot who believed his friend would accept that, and as such had his drink spiked by that friend. His friend hung up, and he was left staring at his phone in the following silence. What was he going to do? He felt oddly aroused, though, by the narcotics rushing through his system. He called his friend again and told him to get down to the docks so they could plan the handoff to the buyer of the bracelet. His friend agreed and hung up. He remembered his girlfriend, but brushed the thought off. He sat himself down on the old, mildewed sofa and nodded off. He was woken abruptly by his friend, who handed him a bottle of water which he emptied halfway in a single gulp. There it was again, the strangely arousing sense of drugs. His friend explained to him that the drugs was to keep him in control. Suddenly, they heard a knock on the door. A voice asked if there was someone there. His friend panicked and pulled out a knife before opening the door. He sat there trying to get up when he saw a man in a uniform standing outside the door, when his friend suddenly proceeded to stab the man in the stomach. The man gasped breathlessly and fell to the ground. His friend went over to him and gave him the knife before leaving him sitting on the mildewed sofa with the body of the man blocking the door. He sat there before hearing police sirens outside the shed. He ran outside and spotted his girlfriend with the police officers. She looked at him and the man lying on the ground. She looked into his eyes, and there was something about her expression that made him feel great annoyance and pain. He ran off, not listening to her plea for his return. He ran back into the city streets and headed toward the park. He hid behind the public restroom and drank the rest of the water from the spiked water bottle. He smiled and shuddered as the drugs went into his system. Dusk was falling and it was getting dark. Suddenly, he heard a familiar voice calling out for him. Panic spiked once more and he peeked round the corner to check. It was his girlfriend, crying and begging for him to come out of hiding. He walked up to her while her back was turned and stood there waiting for her to turn around. She turned and seemed taken aback. He looked at her. She raised her hand and placed it on his cheek, tears in her eyes. He held her hand close to his cheek and looked at her with equally tear-filled eyes. She told him that they had found his friend with the bracelet and some of the victim's blood on his clothes. She knew that her boyfriend was innocent for murder, but he was guilty of stealing the bracelet. She looked at him and kissed him. She then asked him to turn himself in, making him feel something rushing through his veins. He pulled back and began raving about not him wanting to go back to prison. Never. She tried to calm him down, but to no avail. She raised her voice and grabbed him. He stopped and stared at her with madness in his eyes. She talked to him in a calm manner and begged him to listen to her. He stood there staring into open air as she embraced him, wetting his neck with her tears. They stood there when suddenly the air was pierced with the shrill sound of police car sirens. He started panicking and struggled to break free of her embrace. She refused to let go, making him outrageous. He pushed her away, but she hadn't let go and almost swung back at him. She stopped and gasped loudly. He looked down at her and saw that he had pulled out the knife his friend had given him and that he had held the blade forward as she came back at him. The blade had sunk deep into her chest, and when he pulled the knife from the wound, blood spurted out, staining her peach-colored top that he had gotten for her. She stared at him with tears in her eyes and whispered breathlessly that she loved him before falling onto the pavement. He held her in his arms and cried harder by the minute. Those memories of what he had done to her made his heart shatter. He sat there with her in his arms as the police car pulled up to the scene. They found an ambulance and asked him to let her go, so they could get her into the ambulance. He refused and just cried. Finally, the superintendent managed to convince him to let go. He lifted her onto the ambulance stretcher himself and kissed her farewell before turning to the superintendent and reaching out his hands to be handcuffed. He was put in the police car, but not before he had turned around and looked at his girlfriend's body and whispered,
"I'm sorry, baby. I love you."